Welcome to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. My name is Teresa MacLennan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. We are so thankful that you have joined us today. The nature of our show is that we talk about the lives and experiences of women. We do talk about violence against women, gender-based violence, human trafficking, women in leadership and business. And we're just really thankful that our community comes alongside us to learn and have these conversations. Before we begin, we do want to acknowledge and thank our Indigenous community partners and just the culture and heritage that you offer to all of us. Thank you for allowing us to share in this space and to have these conversations. So today I am really thrilled to welcome my guest, June FitzGerald, and we're going to be diving into the difficulties with finding safe and affordable housing in relation to women who have left an abusive relationship and what that looks like for them. So without further ado, we're going to dive in and have a conversation with my good friend June. June, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell folks just a little bit about yourself and maybe the position that you have here at the shelter?
Okay. So I've worked here for about 12 years. I spent my first, I believe it was 9 years in frontline up in the shelter. And the last 2 or 3 years I've been in the transitional housing support role. And in that time I've helped different women in supporting them in finding housing and yeah.
So I think it's great experience because you also came from working in the shelter, in the front lines.
Yeah.
And so you've seen and supported women when they come in that very, very vulnerable place, having left their abuser.
Yeah.
And we know that they could stay in the shelter for 6 weeks. Immigrant, refugee woman, maybe over a year.
Yeah.
So I want to start to unpack housing, because I know that you offer housing support to women and their children, and just the difficulties in doing that. So would I be right in saying that when a woman comes into the shelter and has left her abusive partner and their home, is she homeless at that moment?
I would say technically she is. I mean, of course, if there's space at the shelter, of course she has space here, but really she is homeless. She doesn't have a fixed address. And that certainly can, pose its share of difficulties in finding housing if they're not even able to find space at a shelter. So.
Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about, the housing pieces, right? And so let's start at the very beginning and talk about what housing looks like here in the city of Barrie. We hear a lot of folks saying that, I don't know where we are ranking right now in terms of rental rates.
So with that, I can tell you...
Where should we start with that?
Well, there's lots. So starting with that, with the rental rates, we are third in the country for highest rental rates.
Wow.
The two other spaces are in, or cities, I guess, are in BC. We actually have a higher rent price, I guess, than Toronto, which is amazing. And crazy all at the same time.
Yeah.
And with the housing, I guess, not boom, but like the real estate boom basically that happened within the last couple of years, especially over COVID, it jacked the prices up of houses. And so once the prices come up in housing, that affects the rental properties, right? So you have landlords that have previously bought at a certain price and have a certain rent, which is okay, possibly decent, but if you have somebody coming into the investment of buying the house at that time, the rent's going to be really, really high, and quite frankly, most of the rent is unattainable for our women because of the income they have.
And so that is exactly what we're hearing. I mean, the news is talking about it. It is shocking to hear that our rental rates here in the city of Barrie are even higher than Toronto.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
I think it's probably it's sort of an inconspicuous town. It's not like Toronto where it's so big and stuff like that. But I think in terms of just people moving around, Barrie's very much, it's on the, the 400. It's just above Toronto. It's great for commuting. People tend to, because of the prices of houses, even though we are in you know, a terrible spot for the prices of housing and how high they are. They're not that high to people who are working in Toronto full time. So they'll come up here and they'll commute, right? So
And they'll pay it. I
They'll pay
guess they'll pay it because they're coming from Toronto where incomes are higher.
yes,
And then I think about something that you said about COVID. COVID sort of threw us into working remotely from home.
yeah.
And I wonder if that plays a part too, that
Oh, yeah.
more people working from home, you have more opportunity for people who are looking for housing and spaces,
Yep.
right? And so who maybe can't afford it.
Yeah.
So coming back to the experience for our women and how we support them, my goodness. So when women come into the shelter, or even not, so they're in an abusive relationship, and let's say they either come into the shelter or maybe they go and stay with family,
Yeah.
and they're at that beginning stage of needing to find housing. What things do they need to think about and consider in terms of maybe safety, right? What do they need to think about when they are looking for housing?
Well, of course, you're going to see it's the main theme throughout the entire conversation is price,
Yeah.
right? It's not meeting what they're making, because typically a great number of our clients, they have lower incomes. So whether it's they're on Ontario Works, or they're on ODSP, or perhaps they have you know, a job that's paying, well, I guess we're at what, $14 an hour now?
Minimum wage, yeah.
Minimum wage.
Yeah.
Which, you know, how are you supposed to afford a place to rent when you have 2 children with you and they want $2,200 plus utilities for a space to live in?
Do you have any idea what let's say a woman who is receiving Ontario Works, do you have any idea or just rough amount of what Ontario Works income looks like, and then compare that to rental amounts?
Right.
So you mentioned like a woman with 2 children. Would we know what that Ontario Works rate might kind of look like?
Yeah, it's approximate. It's probably around $1,100 or $1,200. But I mean, women would also, if they're lucky enough to still have their child tax benefit, because that's a whole other piece in terms of the separation, access, custody.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, landlords don't count it as income, which,
Really?
yeah. So it's not a good situation, because if they're presenting on paper as having an income, let's say, I don't know, of $3,200, and they're wanting to rent a place for $1,800, let's say, they can afford it, but the landlord might not rent to them because A, they're on Ontario Works, and B, because child tax benefit is not considered an income.
So I really want to just kind of highlight that number because it is so helpful for myself and our viewers to really hear. A woman with 2 children on Ontario Works may receive monthly a rough amount of $1,100.
Yeah.
So in comparison to the rental amounts, like you mentioned, maybe $2,200 for rent.
Yeah.
How can a woman possibly live on $1,100 for rent and having to buy food for her family?
Right. So hopefully they've found a landlord that is willing to rent to them, even though child tax benefit typically is not you know, seen as income. Basically, that's where resources in the community come in. And so that is part of my job, is to let the women know what resources are out there. So whether it's food insecurity, so groceries, I will tell women, absolutely buy the groceries that are specific to your family that you want. But if you can go to the food bank and you can get typical, say, canned vegetables or whatever is a typical item you could get at the food bank, do that so that you can supplement your budget by going to the food bank. Clothing and stuff like that. Like we have different resources for clothing, and I'll point the women in the direction, give them the referral. It saves them on, you know, having to get clothes for the kids for school and stuff like that. So there's different pieces in the community that I can connect them to that sort of brings that budget down. And I can do budgeting with them as well. I've made up like a budget sheet, and because a lot of times when people are sitting down, first of all, this may be the first time they've ever budgeted, because maybe partner was the sole income earner and most typically in control of the money. So sitting down and doing the budgeting and seeing, oh, I have to pay this, and oh, wow, that's that much, helps them to be able to continue to keep a budget and maintain their housing, because that's another part of my job, is helping the woman maintain the housing through those other things too, the budgeting and the resources and stuff like that. So
This is great information, you know what, June, because I know that there's going to be women who are listening and watching us today, right, having this conversation, who may be thinking about leaving their abusive partner. And we really hope that this conversation will kind of give them some insight and prepare them a little bit about what to expect, and also just to know more about your services and how you can support them. And so we will spend some time in our conversation today just really talking more about what you do and how you can help those women who might be listening today. And so I think we've already learned a lot just about the difficulty for women to pack up or just pick up and leave, come into the shelter, leave everything behind, technically be homeless, like you said, and then have to try and navigate finding housing that is safe, a good place for them to be, but that they can afford, and then having to use all the community resources too. So we're going to dive back into this, and I really appreciate all the information that you're sharing. We really hope that you'll stay with us as we dive back into this, and we know the struggle for so many in our community in terms of trying to find safe housing. And so June is going to be a great resource today in our conversation. So please stay with us, and we look forward to continuing our conversation about affordable housing in the city of Barrie. We'll be back really short. Welcome back to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. We're having a great discussion today and learning so much about the challenge to find affordable housing here in the city of Barrie. And we're putting it into the context of talking about abused women and their children who have left an abusive relationship and what they face in trying to find that affordable housing. So welcome back, June.
Thank you.
And just so grateful for the conversation that we're having today. So let's dive in deep, because I know that there are different timelines, different programs that women who have suffered abuse can apply to in terms of housing. So where do you want to start with us? If a woman comes into the shelter and she wants to apply for housing, what's the timeline? What does that look like for her?
Right. So with the County of Simcoe, there's what is called social housing, so rent geared to income, where you pay 30% of your income goes towards the rent. So anybody that falls within that sort of numerical or income level can apply, but in particular for our women, there is a special priority program where they can apply as well. Of course, there are pieces about income, but they get to go to the top of the list compared to the centralized wait list, which can be, I think I've heard at this point, 10 to 15 years before you get something, right, from housing for a unit. And so the women will apply to this special priority. And even then, the timing is it's still a long time. Like 1 bedroom and say 3 and 4 bedrooms can be like 3 years to wait for.
To wait
To wait
for
3
housing.
years. Yeah. And so the fastest is 2 bedrooms. I've seen anywhere between 6 months and a year. The other piece, though, too, to the special priority is that, again, there's timelines there, too. So when a woman comes in, let's say a woman comes into the shelter or they come into my service, they have 3 months until they can, or sorry, 3 months. If 3 months passes and they haven't got their application in, it's too late. So they only have 3 months to get it in from the time they've left their partner. The other piece is they have to have lived with them for at least 3 months. So even coming into these parameters can be difficult for women because, let's face it, women, they've still faced abuse, but they just haven't met the timeline of some other, agency or, government program. And they can't apply.
So what happens after that 3-month period?
Well, it can come down to advocacy if it's really close, like perhaps if it's, say 4 months or something, I can advocate to say, listen, she wasn't able to get her application in because she didn't know about the program or whatever. But beyond that, it's market rent. So when we talk about women, for example, so I had mentioned it was $1,100 for, a woman plus 2 children. So let's look at a woman who is single. So she would make $733 a month on Ontario Works. And so right now in Barrie, the average for a bedroom to rent is like about $700, $600 or $700.
For just a room?
Just a room.
So we might be talking more like a boarding house situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's sort of what they're looking at in terms of market rent. As a single woman on Ontario Works or a woman with children on Ontario Works, that's the market they're looking at. And a lot of women will stay with their partner and risk their safety for that because they just know the numbers aren't matching up, right?
Yeah.
So, and they don't want to make their children homeless, so they end up staying with partner,
And we know there's so many reasons that women have to make that difficult decision to stay, and finances,
it's a big
and
one.
being homeless and trying to create some kind of shelter for your children is so key.
Yeah.
Can you speak to what that looks like for our women who have lived in abuse, looking at a room and board situation? How safe is that for them?
So I often say that affordability and safety don't seem to connect. They don't seem to interject each other because quite honestly, we know the realities that if you're in a room and board situation, there's a lot of complex needs from the people that are rooming in that house, whether it be mental health struggles, addictions, all sorts of different things that can make it kind of unsafe for the woman, And even if, say, a woman rented a room or two for her and her child, again, that makes it unsafe for the woman and the child, right? So yeah, it can certainly be an unsafe situation, but there are absolutely, like with everything in life, there are situations where you've got great landlords and they're renting out rooms and they keep it clean and tidy and it's a great atmosphere, but typically that's not the case.
It's not the case, and I can imagine that for our women, they have a mistrust because someone who is supposed to love them has hurt them, and then they're going into a situation where they might be sharing a house with 5, 6 other people that they don't know, and having to share common spaces, like a kitchen, maybe sometimes a bathroom, and just how risky that can feel for women.
Risky and triggering, right? Because perhaps partner was, he would drink or he would, use drugs or whatever, and the behavior that came out of that perhaps is the same behavior, although the person in the boarding room, maybe they're not looking to hurt the person, but the way they're behaving can certainly hurt the person mentally because they're triggered by it, right?
Yeah.
So it can definitely feel unsafe without the physical portion of it, of being unsafe.
So walk us through then, June. A woman comes into the shelter and she's got to start doing applications. So what are all the pieces that she needs to have in place to have a successful application, like proving that they live together, I don't know what, right? So walk us through what that process will look like for her and for you, what you do to help her and what she needs to have in place.
Yeah. So again, that sort of comes back to the timeline piece about, the 3 months and such. But With this, there is a part of the application for special priority where you need to prove that you cohabitated with your partner. That can be difficult when you grabbed your bag, your purse, and your child and ran out the door. You're not thinking to grab a utility bill that has both their names and the address on it and a current date, which is what housing is looking for, right? So that's definitely something we struggle with, trying to figure out, what can we use for the proof of cohabitation.
So before we move on, I want to make sure that that's clear for any woman that's listening right now. If you are living at home with your abuser and you're planning on leaving, to grab copies of bills that have your names, what would
Utility.
be good? A utility
So
bill.
cell phone bills don't work, credit card bills don't work. It needs to tie to the address. So whether it's the electricity, gas,
With with her name on it, both names,
it
does
can
it
be
matter?
hers, the address, the date, his, the address, the date, or it can be a bill that has both on it. But,
And that is such great information for women listening to know. Because we do safety planning with women all the time, but do we say to them, listen, don't forget to take this?
Yeah, because who thinks of grabbing their utility bill when they're running out the door?
Exactly, right?
So,
You're thinking of just the essentials, right? And thinking of what you need for your kids.
for sure.
So, woman comes into shelter, she's planning on leaving shelter, hoping to apply for housing. So, you step in and you start that SPP application for her. Walk us through then what happens.
So there's other pieces of important information they actually should be taking with them. Besides that is birth certificates for everybody, so the children and herself, because they'll need that for the application. The other piece, there's 2 letters that go with the application. So there's one from the woman herself, which I support her in writing the letter, because of course it's very difficult for women to be writing it because it's re-traumatizing, right?
And is that letter sort of talking about her experience as an abused woman?
Yeah, and I tell women, of course, you don't have to share everything because you do have a right to your autonomy. But at the same time, if we can just outline the types of abuse and the time frames that it happened, you do have to share partner's name on the letter, but he or she would never know that it was on there. It's confidential. So there are key pieces like that in the letter,
that you help them, because I think you're so well versed in how you provide this great service, right? And so if a woman is coming to you for service, you walk her through and you kind of help her with that. So there's that one letter about kind of her personal experience, and then you mentioned another.
Yes, so I will have the woman write her letter first, and actually I have sort of I guess it's almost like a template or guide for her to help her write the letter, besides my input or advice to help her. But then I take her letter and I form my letter off of it, because it is her story, right? So I take what she has said and I say it in my own words and highlight the pieces that I know are possibly what needs to be seen by housing, and write my own advocacy letter. So I send those 2 letters along with, of course, we fill out the application, birth certificates, and the proof of cohabitation. The piece also too with the application, there's a lot of information that they do have to share. Again, it's confidential. It's between housing and the woman and myself. But stuff like, you need to know what were your addresses within the last 5 years. Sometimes that can be a struggle because, sometimes women have to move around a lot, right? So I help them with that. There's other pieces about, say they're choosing the different units. Well, how many bedroom unit can I choose? What area is good in Barrie, or, good or bad, sort of thing. And I'll go through the different pieces with them.
And sorry to interrupt you, but so does a woman have to, or anybody, identify so many options for housing?
They literally could check off one if they wanted to.
Okay.
But statistically, like the numbers, if you choose more in more areas outside of Barrie as well as Barrie, the timeline definitely shortens when it comes to being offered something.
So you could have more success.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So our conversation is going so quickly today because it's just such great information, and we've got about 5 minutes left, believe it or not. I feel like we need to have you come back so we can dive in deeper. Once you've gotten with the woman all those pieces together in the application, proof of cohab, the letters, all the income pieces, the identification. It goes to?
So it goes to the tenant manager, Debbie Harris at Ontario on Housing. And so she will review the different applications, because it's not just ourselves. I mean, there's other shelters in the area, other agencies in the area that can send in the applications as well.
The SPP?
Special priority, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so it can take a bit. I mean, they are inundated because we know we're in a housing crisis, and yeah, our women need housing. So it does take a bit to process, but at the end, honestly, it does take long to be offered something too. So that's sort of the short wait.
And I want to ask you this: if a woman is offered a unit and she, let's say her abuser lives in the same building and she doesn't feel comfortable with that, what happens if she decides to not take that unit?
So I would advocate for her. So the piece is, women are only offered one choice. Or sorry, one offer.
Okay.
They can make multiple choices, but they're only given one offer. If she accidentally, or let's say he moved in after she had made these choices, I can advocate to say, you know what, he's living there. We can't take this unit. We need to take that off the list and get reoffered again.
Okay.
So yeah.
There's so much great information here. My goodness.
Part of my job not only is the beginning, it's the middle, and it's an end, I guess, sort of.
Yeah.
It's the maintaining, it's the transitioning into the housing. So there's all sorts of resources in terms of transitioning into the housing, like housing retention. There's like moving costs and like last month's rent that the county can cover if they qualify. There's the furniture bank that we can get them connected with furniture. Of course, going to the food bank to get a good, grocery, amount to put in the house. So all sorts of resources to make that transition into their unit. And then once they're in their unit, it's also a matter of, like I had mentioned before, about the budgeting and maintaining those resources, so that they can keep a budget that's realistic, so that they can keep their housing, because that's important, because once you have it, you need to
keep
on.
it, right? Because it's so hard, I'm sure, to leave it.
Yeah.
And I think too, from what I understand in the expertise that you offer in the work you do, certainly you help women with budgeting and how to maintain their finances in their place that they're living, which also includes working through relationships.
Yeah.
In the building, relationships that women are still having to navigate with their ex-partners.
Yeah.
So if there's a woman watching today, what is the best way for her to get involved, to ask you questions, to reach out to you, an abused woman who is looking to leave and wanting to do it the right way? How does she get a hold of you?
So they can connect with the frontline office here, the crisis line, so 705-728-2544.
2544.
Sorry.
Yeah, good.
And they can ask for transitional housing support. So there are 2 workers in our program, and yeah, we can, either one of us can work with them and certainly set them up for success.
And can you share your email before we go?
That I can do.
Great.
So it's June, June, @barrieshelter.com.
If you're a woman listening today and you're thinking about leaving your abusive relationship and wondering about housing supports, give our crisis line a call. Reach out to June FitzGerald to get the help and support that you need. We are here for you, and we really want to help you on this journey. Thank you, our community, for being with us today. We really appreciate you coming alongside us in these conversations, and we hope that today you felt that you were educated, informed, and challenged.